it is time now, everybody, for fact number 16. And oh my days, do we have a fantastic guest for you. This person is someone who we have obsessed over and stolen the material of ever since. Yeah, he needs to know. This is one of the greats of interesting information. Along with his partner, Stephen Levitt, he co-wrote the best-selling series of books known as Freakonomics. He is the host of the Freakonomics podcast. Please welcome to No Such Thing as a Fish. We're so excited. It is Stephen J Dubner. Woo!
Dubner. I would like to say that all the facts that you have allegedly stolen from me, rather than collect the royalties which are duly owed, I will contribute them to Comic Relief. So basically, it's up to you.
That is a true economist speaking.
Good to see you, Stephen. Thank you for doing our show.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I'm here just outside of New York City. I'm on Curly Dick Road. All is well.
Oh, well, let's crack into it. I don't want to waste time. I want to get facts. So It is time for fact number 16, and that is Stephen J Dubner.
So my fact is it even a fact? I guess it is a fact. It's a fact in the form of a question about asking questions.
Okay.
Wow. And what the fact is, therefore, is that most of us, in fact, almost all humans, refrain from asking what we consider very sensitive questions to other people. And when I say most of us, we've probably all known a few who didn't, and they become very unpopular because they're considered, kind of crazy. But research by, I'm trying to think if they're all psychologists. It's a couple of psychologists and one PhD in cognitive science, which covers a lot of things. 3 researchers did a really amazing set of experiments in which they conditioned and incentivized people to ask what are considered sensitive questions, and found that the people being asked the questions, in fact, liked it, and they rated those questions higher than non-sensitive questions. And the people who were asking the questions really liked it because they gained information, whether it's about, salary, or have you ever committed a crime, or tell me the most, the best orgasm you've ever had, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this whole list of questions that are floating around in our heads, or my head at least. Maybe I'm deranged, it's possible. But there are these questions floating around in our heads that the smart part of us instantaneously rejects. And the fact is, we should stop rejecting them, and we should actually ask those questions for the most part.
Okay, so Stephen, I have a question. How did you feel the first time I played golf with you and I beat you?
So that would be a sensitive question if the second time we had played golf, I had not crushed you in an act of revenge that I still treasure to this day. In fact, I was considering renaming Curly Dick Road to James Dick Road.
I got the curls just about.
Yeah. So I'll be honest, that's not a bad sensitive question. The first day, I felt pretty bad, but I rationalized because I was just off an airplane. And the other fact is that I'm not a very good golfer, which is also a good explanation. But then I caught you fresh off an airplane and I won. And my favorite thing about that day, which I remember quite well, is that you insisted on paying off the debt immediately. The debt was 1 bottle of whiskey, and you came with me to the liquor store and picked it out and put it in my hands. And I have to say, that was a very gentlemanly way, I think, to execute, to pay off the debt.
It looked like a cheap whiskey shop. I thought if we got back to London, it might cost me a lot more.
Self-interest is everywhere. So, James, let me ask you this question.
Oh, no, I don't.
Let's say that was a $70 bottle of whiskey, maybe.
Yeah.
If you had lost a golf match to Michael Palin, how much would you have spent on him?
Oh, I can't imagine anyone else would be able to beat me at golf, but let's assume they could for a second. No, the same, of course. I would for the same for all my friends.
So my question plainly wasn't sensitive enough. James.
No. I mean, how could you ask me such a question? I couldn't possibly answer. That's
So Anna, I have a question for you. You know these three people much better than Andrew. We've never met, which I'm horrified by, and I would like to fix that. Anna, I've never met you either. I admire all of your work very much, and I know James and Dan a little bit. But Anna, I do have a question for you, which is which of these three might appear to be pretty good, especially live, but you know that in fact you're carrying them?
Great. I mean, that's a sensitive question for these guys, but I would say it's very much, sometimes when you're watching a Western and there's a horse and it's got a man and his girlfriend riding on it. But this is like, so I'm the horse and then it's the man, his girlfriend and their young child.
She's trying to say Dan, and it's just taking a weird
I'm saying it's all three of you. Come on. Was that not obvious from the metaphor? I thought that was.
I thought it was obvious. I was wondering who the small child was, and then Dan jumped in.
And Dan jumped in with his misunderstanding, and that made it clear to everyone.
I've never seen a Western where there's more than one person on a horse. Does that exist?
It's not a huge Western, I'd say. Sometimes you need a lift from someone else.
Why did you go? Why did you leave on the horse? You and your wife and your small child.
It's classic. It's gunfights and double horsing. That's what they call it in the West.
All right, here's a question. Dan, are you the only one wearing a tie as a compensation for the fact that you're perhaps not as smart as the others?
Absolutely. Well, I think not just for this scenario, for life in general, I feel it does add a sense of, okay, I did just say something really fucking weird about the moon just now. But look, he's got a tie. Maybe that was just a little slip. It makes me feel like there's a bit of a costume in a sort of superhero sense. It's my uniform. When I feel like I want to do stand-up comedy or I want to do stuff like this, the podcast, having a tie on is like a security blanket for me. Don't know why.
Do you ever sleep in your tie?
Well, I pass out in my tie a lot. But no, not intentionally. Never intentionally.
Thank God. I thought we were going to have it revealed that Dan sleeps in nothing but a tie or something.
That would be sensitive.
So I know that you guys have been going, I guess, all day. Are you wearing diapers?
Well, we haven't asked each other. But
I only know whether one of us is wearing a diaper or not.
Yeah, and it's me. James knows whether I'm wearing a diaper or not. He doesn't know whether he is, but I do.
We have mini breaks in between but it's going to be weird because after this finishes, we will all be in a weird sync of, removing waste from our bodies, and I think that's going to be a very strange place to be.
I wonder how long that'll last.
Forever, I think.
Yeah, I hope so.
Forgive my ignorance on the COVID front there, but have you all seen each other in person at all since the beginning?
We have. We've done 2 shows where we were spaced out.
Yeah,
and it was obviously not in full lockdown time. So yeah, we haven't hugged. But we never did, so it's fine. Yeah.
I always try to hug. I'm a hugger. I always get pushed back. Yeah. Hey, I found, just talking about the idea of this being my superhero suit and maybe for trying to compensate. I read the other day that Tony Blair, when he was Prime Minister, he wore for question time, Prime Minister's questions, because he was going to be grilled every single time. He wore the same pair of shoes for every single question time that he ever did. Yeah, it was his, I guess, security blanket in a sense. He was like, let's get the shoes on, let's answer these questions.
He's not doing much walking though or anything, is he? He's just standing there in them.
That's true.
Yeah.
I know something else about Tony Blair. He would leave the house in the morning carrying a mug of tea or coffee. And it was weird because he was going out of his front door and he was going to the chauffeur-driven ministerial car. He was getting in the car, and it sort of made him look, like a man of the people. Oh, I'm just stepping out of the house with my cuppa. But someone's got to take that mug at the other end of the journey and then get it back to Tony Blair's house. It is a weird
Do you think it goes back in a limo on the way back?
Bet,
Just
yeah.
the mug. Yeah.
But does he not have
a
a
mug chauffeur, didn't
What
he?
would you have suggested he do otherwise, though? A disposable cup? Because that would be environmentally...
I just finish your tea before
Finish.
you leave your house.
yeah.
You know, it's so obviously done as a slightly.
Do you think maybe it was vodka?
I don't even think it was vodka. I think it was a PR professional thinking this makes me look approachable and friendly, but still the guy who's in charge because I got my suit, but I've also got my cuppa.
You old cynic. No, you just like tea in the car.
Maybe.
What if he had a tea on the way back as well? Do we know that?
No, I don't. But
I think on the way back he used it to pee in because he'd been holding it in. Like you all had.
And that's the kind of sensitive question he wouldn't mind you asking.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. We once in a million years ago, I played music. That was my first career. And we had a band that started during college and went after, and we would travel around. We lived in the South of America, of North Carolina. We traveled around. And once we drove to Nashville, Tennessee for a series of gigs, and it's a pretty long drive. And we didn't drink a lot or do a lot of drugs. We were relatively very straight-laced. But in the van on the way, we drank some beers. A couple of us did. And then we had to pee. And when you're in a band, you're not going to stop just to pee if you have empty beer bottles. So you just pee in the beer bottles, then put them back in the 6-pack container. And when we got to the club we were playing, we brought them in and set them on the counter, meaning to dispose them. But the people there assumed that we were bringing beer because it looked an awful lot like beer because they were beer bottles that were full. And they said, you're not going to bring any of that stuff in here tonight, are you? Meaning you have to buy our beer. And that was my Tony Blair story.
The thing is, that since it was American beer, no one noticed the difference anyway.
That's not very nice. I've drunk some British beer that let me know that your horse was ill.
Can I just ask a question about, so is there a difference between sensitive questions and insulting questions?
Such a good question. It almost makes me think you listened to our episode about sensitive questions.
I actually didn't even listen to the episode, and that's a terrible thing for me to admit, isn't
Not
it?
at all. Not at all. So yes, there is a difference, and I pushed the boundaries with one of the researchers to just figure out what's the difference. And it turns out that I, probably like most of us, am quite bad at asking sensitive questions because we don't do it. And then, you try to, what happened is I would try to ask a slightly more sensitive question and it still wasn't very sensitive. And then what happened is I immediately crossed the bridge over to offensive.
So what is it offensive to ask how much someone weighs?
So we didn't get into that, but I would say
context, maybe.
Yeah, context for sure. But so I think the most common sensitive question that people don't ask has to do with money. Because and that's not unobvious, right? And a lot of people say that when you're in a job or talking with friends that really people should be comparing salaries all the time because it's information that can help you. But I think, like, to me, one of the most interesting types of sensitive questions are questions around what you think the person you're speaking with. And obviously every conversation is different. It's strangers, it's friends. There are dyadic conversations, two people versus more, et cetera, et cetera. But I think one of the most interesting sensitive questions that we fail to ask are ones that might get at something that the person is distraught or distressed about. So I'll tell you an example. I have a friend, a very, very dear friend, who has many children now, but his first child, his wife's, their first child died tragically at age 1. And this was before I knew him. And by the time I knew him, he had several more children. And I didn't even know this story in the beginning, but then as I got to know him, I learned about it. And I immediately did what most people do, which is say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That must have been very difficult. And my friend is a very unusual person who's kind of antisocial, but when he's feeling social, he will ask sensitive questions. And he said, you did exactly what everybody does in that case, which is when his name would come up, people would shut down just like that. But the fact is that if you're a parent and you've had that kind of situation with a child, you want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And the fact is that there was this massive gap between what he wanted to express and what he was allowed to express but because people are shy or they think they'll offend or so on. But I've really, I think the reason that I do writing and radio, I'm sure for the same reason that you all do, is because you're selfish. You want to learn things through your work that actually make your life more interesting or better. And I really learned from that, but it wasn't until I read this research that empirically proved that people don't take offense when you ask these questions in the aggregate. Of course, there are outliers, and that they actually consider you a better person for asking a more sensitive question. And of course, you have a lot to gain, whether it's information about salary or just being interested or titillated in what they say.
Yeah. You do, Stephen, this is a question that you ask people, and it turned into a show, which I was very lucky to help you work on. But it's a question that I think everyone should ask, and I can't believe they don't do it more. And it's a thing where Stephen will sit, if he's on a plane, next to someone, start up a conversation, and they'll say, "What do you do?" And they'll say, "Oh, I'm a technician, or I work in stocks." And then Stephen will say, "Tell me something I don't know about that." And that question just leads to the greatest opening up of anyone's personality, because suddenly they know you're interested in what they might think is a dull thing in their life. And I love that. And I love how you do that everywhere. I think I know it's not a sensitive question. I think it's just the best question. And I
don't know. If someone says I work in stocks and I say, tell me something I don't know about that, they've got the entirety of stocks to play with there. So you've got to narrow it down for them.
Did you mean stocks like Wall Street or the city stocks, or stocks like when you're in stocks?
When you're in the stocks, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's
interestingly, the tomatoes don't hurt as much as you think. The pineapples are much better.
Interesting fact. Sensitive questions. I love that there's often celebrities aren't, if they're going to do an interview, they always say, "Don't ask me this question." They always have a list of things that you're meant to not ask. So Meatloaf specifically does not want to be asked, what wouldn't he do for love? That's the thing that he has to tell Judge. Just don't ask me what I wouldn't do for love. Yeah. And David Icke, when he went to New Zealand, he asked for journalists not to ask about his failed predictions, one of which was that New Zealand would completely disappear in the late 90s. And the Killers, there was a great one where they said, "Please don't ask us about Bruce Springsteen, religion, or beards." So someone just straight away went for it and said, "Who's got the best beard, Jesus or Bruce Springsteen?"
All right, here's a question for you. So I realize the format of your show does not include bringing on PhDs and interviewing them necessarily, but you all know a lot of interesting, smart people, and I'm sure you know a lot of uninteresting, dumb people too. So when you ask people questions these days, let's say you ask 100 people a question about like a very surface question about like even what'd you have for lunch or what's the name of your next door neighbor, what share of that 100 will respond with, "Oh, that's a great question"? Is that a thing in Britain? Because it is here.
Oh, what, like a very rudimentary question?
It's definitely no. It's in America.
That's not a thing.
That's a very American thing, I think. Do you like it or do you not like it?
I hate it so much. So we actually made an episode about that years ago too, because if you watch American television, or the worst offenders are if you go to a conference of any sort, an academic conference, a tech conference, a market, whatever, and there's a moderator and a panel, and the moderator is asking questions like, "Tell me how you got involved in marketing." And inevitably they'll say, "Oh, that's a great question." And so we wanted to understand why on earth people say that when it's prima facie a bonehead obvious question. And it turns out that it serves several purposes at once. It stalls. It's a filibuster. It's grotesque flattery to tell the interlocutor that you've actually said something interesting. But I think what it also does is it completes the circle. So Dan, when you mentioned the question, "Tell me something I don't know," that I like to ask, the reason that people love that question so much is that we're all narcissists. And if you ask me a question, about what I do that you may not know. It's a little bit of a challenge, but it lets me tap into my expertise. And so I think that we just grotesquely undervalue how great question asking is. And when I was a kid, I'm still actually very shy, and I compensate by talking too long like I am right now. But one of the reasons I became a writer and a journalist was because it gives you permission. In fact, it forces you to ask questions of people. And so for me, it's been very fruitful and indeed profitable. But I think, I think we should just encourage more people to ask more different types of questions, and the world would be much less dull.
I don't know. I'm discouraged because I've just remembered at the start of this, I asked a question and you said, that's a great question. And I've now realized you thought it was a real boneheaded question. I believe
right into the trap.
I was going to say, the only people who do that, I think British politicians, they do it a bit, don't they? Yeah. They'll say, oh, that's a really important question. Or, they do that a little bit.
Yeah. That's true. Although it's kind of like saying, I've got a really good answer. It's sort of, I'm about to talk for a little while, and lucky you.
There does seem to be one hitch with the asking questions thing. I think this is research that some psychologists did in the last couple of years, which is this paradox. So you're more likable the more you ask questions, and people massively underestimate that. So people don't ask enough questions of the person they're speaking to. But one of the reasons is because when they see it happening, it doesn't make them like people. Because apparently, if you're watching a third party ask a question of someone else, then you don't really like it. I guess this must all come back to our narcissism. It's like, well, I don't care about the answer that person's got to give. Ask me a question.
Yeah, I think so. What I learned recently from interviewing a dog, a cognitive scientist who specializes in dog behavior.
Honestly, Steve, at the start of that sentence, I learned recently from interviewing a dog. I really wanted to know where that ended up.
He's a great biscuit. Yeah.
I wish that my dog had enough brain power to even pretend to be interviewed. My dog is a very not bright dog, although I love her. But so there is a cognitive scientist named Alexandra Horowitz who, when she was getting her PhD in cognitive science, needed a field of study. And she didn't really have something, but she had a dog. And she would bring her dog to dog runs to let her dog play with other dogs. And she started observing their behavior and found it to be quite interesting, et cetera, et cetera. And so she's devoted her career to studying the inner life, essentially, of dogs, which turns out, if you're a dog person, which I happen to be, it's really interesting because they're not necessarily very smart, but they're smart enough to learn what we want and how to manipulate us. So they still haven't learned how to open doors, but they've learned how to get us to open doors. They haven't learned how to open a can of dog food. So anyway, she made the point that even dogs, when they're getting together to play, that their behavior in pairs, their play behavior in pairs, so their dyadic play, as she would call it, is one thing. And then the minute a third dog, or God forbid, a fourth or fifth dog comes in, everything about the way they play changes. And I asked her, and that makes perfect sense with dogs, right? And I asked her if that's the same for humans. And she said, oh, absolutely, maybe even more so. And I realized that's the thing about, parties or I hate parties. I hate any kind of gathering. I don't like people that much, honestly. I like you all fine, but other than you, so much. But if you think about it, when you're having a conversation with a person, it's a kind of whatever dance, however you want to frame it. But then the minute there's another, even as compatible as they may be, the whole nature of that interchange changes. So, and I think what you're saying about the observation of the third party, that makes perfect sense, because if you're the third party, you're excluded from that intimate conversation. So what I conclude from this research is that you should never be in a room with more than one person at a time.
Right. Well, we've really screwed you over tonight, and I'm so sorry about that. I actually have another question just about this. It seems like it's really culturally dependent to me. In our culture, then we don't ask personal questions, but I know a lot of people who, if they go back to their families and other places, they get very personal questions from, their mum's distant friend will say, why aren't you married yet? Why are you so fat? So have they looked at different cultures, or is it human across all humans?
Yeah, so that truly is a good question.
I'm never going to believe it again.
So that is, I will repeat. That is such a good question that I myself asked that of the researchers, in part because the lead researcher, whose name is Einav Hart, is Israeli. And I have a lot of Israeli friends, and I've been there a few times. And it is just a known thing that Israelis, and in fact Jews, I think, not just in Israel, we have a way of, there's a phrase for it that I saw the other day. I think it was called something like, for why we interrupt a lot. I think it was called constructive overlapping, perhaps, which I thought
was a diplomatic way of putting it.
Yeah. But so this scholar is Israeli, and I asked her, in my experience, Israelis tend to be pretty straightforward. Like, how much money do you make? What did you pay for this house? Were those shoes the only shoes you could find today? Whatever. And what she said is that, yes, you're very right in that the specific topics of sensitive questions are extremely culturally dependent. So in one country, it may be salary and sex and abortion and whatever. And in another country, maybe a totally different set. But that overall, the phenomenon is very generalizable, and in every culture, in every group, there is some kind of, quadrant of questions that are considered off limits.
I see.
So it really was a good question. I hope you believe me, Anne.
That's very interesting. So in some countries, it's okay to ask about your salary, but if you say, what's your favorite kind of pot plant, then they'll be mortified.
Yeah. Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good to know.
I was reading about people who, the thing is, all this research so far has been really, really good. And this is what I'm about to say is a survey for an online retailer. But I found it interesting anyway. And according to them, who do you think gets asked the most questions?
Do you mean like profession or
just what group of people? Yeah, receptionists. No,
receptionists.
No.
Okay,
young children.
Parents get asked questions.
Yeah. So parents is right. And how many questions a day do you think they get asked?
Oh wow! You're a parent.
Yeah, I get asked. Hundreds a day by my son. I can't put a number on it, but every moment is a question. Every answer to the question leads to a new question.
They reckon it's more than 300, and on average, you get a question every 1 minute and 56 seconds.
Wow!
But that is because that's how children learn, right?
Yeah,
you learn by questioning everything, and
exactly. I put a thing up on Twitter the other day, which was that I was in Sainsbury's looking at the books and I spotted Andy's book. And so I said to Wilf, my 3-year-old, I said, look, Uncle Andy's book is here. And he said, why did he leave his book here? And
why did you?
Yeah,
I've been trying to get it into supermarkets. It's not selling well enough, and I'm doing my best.
You should put it in the frozen peas section.
But that question suddenly was like, okay, well, here's a minefield. I have to explain that there's a publishing industry that authors are able to get their books published. If they're lucky, they can get into a supermarket and it's a reduced price, so it's going to sell more likely.
I think his mother can answer that kind of question, can't he?
Is there still a publishing industry?
Oh, thank you.
But that was Wilf's next question after I explained.
He's a smart kid. He's overtaken you at this point, hasn't he?
Yeah, he'll be on the podcast next week. This is my goodbye episode.
Yeah.
I will leave you with one more, or I assume I'm leaving you because you have someone else to get to, I'm sure. But I will leave you with one last fact, which is the importance of hearing language for children is so great that it, among other things, are thought to contribute massively to all these inequality gaps, right? And it has been observed, this was research from a long time ago, and it's now thought that the number is much smaller. And you may all know this, but it has been observed that I want to say by the time a child is 3 years old, that the difference between living in a high language household and a low language household is 30 million words, not 30 million different words, plainly. But a child in a low language household, which tends to be a low income household because the parents are working harder, they're around less, and whatever, the TV's on more. So there's a project called the 30 Million Words Project, which they've rebranded as TMW, which is very tricky. And they rebranded it because 30 million may not be the right number and they don't want to be making a specious scientific claim. But the fact is that one of the single best things you can do for your children or your plants, I guess, is just to talk and talk and talk and talk. And look, the five of us plainly believe in this. All we do is sit around and talk. We don't do anything productive, but we talk a lot. So
Hopefully our kids will do productive stuff because we talked at them so much.
I just put on the Fish podcast on in the background and I go, that's Daddy, that voice there. All right, see you in an hour.
Nice.
He hears a lot. Stephen, we are going to have to say goodbye to you. You were right. You were very on the nose there. We are running out of time. But we want to say thank you so much. How cool to finally get you on Fish. We've all, as you say, James and I know you quite well, but you haven't met these two yet. And
Never again.
I did see your live show in New York, which I thought was fantastic. But there was such a mob to get to you that I couldn't say hello. But I love the way the four of you do this. It reminds me of being in the band long ago, which is like the funnest thing, except it's like being married to three people at once. So the fact that you all have carried it off for a few years is incredibly admirable. I love what you're doing.
Our secret is not to piss in bottles, I think.
All right.
Well, thank you, Stephen.
Nice
And we will be back in just a few minutes with our next guest. It is another incredible author. It is Mary Roach. We'll see you in a sec.
Hello, everybody. That was fun, wasn't it? Well, now you have to pay. Please go to comicrelief.com/fish and give us all of your money so that it can be spent on fabulous causes around the world. There are many more videos where these came from, so bring all of your money and give it to us. Link is below. Click on the link.